So the fifth stage of contemplation, you will be pleased to know, is very short. Through the fifth stage of contemplation, which is called counsel by the prophet, I'll give that quotation in a minute. Through the fifth stage of contemplation, you come to understand the changeable nature of visible created things. You come to understand, remember what depth of knowledge is implied by that word understand in these texts. You understand, you have an insight into, you have a direct spiritual knowledge of, direct experience of impermanence. We're going to see the Buddhists tomorrow. This is one of the conditions of enlightenment or wisdom, is to have an insight into impermanence. And it's, you remember what our text was telling us this morning about, through detachment we are able to come to an understanding or an ability to see things as they really are, as to see things in their true nature. Well, for the Buddhist, seeing things in their true nature is happens in an experience of emptiness. And emptiness is not nothingness, it's not a negative quality, rather it's actually the same as poverty of spirit in the Christian vocabulary. And both of these words, emptiness and poverty, of course sound negatives, but when you examine them they are highly creative and positive experiences. And poverty of spirit, we know, means a detachment. What he was speaking about this morning is detachment, letting go, or being non-possessive. It's not having, it's not being possessive of what we have, realizing that what we have is a gift, and you can't change a gift into a possession without changing its nature. If somebody, if it's a real gift, then it comes to you without conditions, without a small print. You know, when you see great offers at the supermarket or on the TV, you think, "Whoa, that's a really great deal," and then it says terms and conditions apply. Well, terms and conditions apply mean that it's not really a free gift. It's simply there to attract your attention and get you hooked, to manipulate you. So, a gift is the nature of reality. What's the nature of life? The gift of life, the gift of faith, the gift of love. What is there of real value in our life that we regard as being essentially human or essentially divine, that we could not say is a gift? You can't buy it. You can't buy love. Money can't buy you love. You can't own it. It has to be received and held or enjoyed as a gift, in the giving. The gift means, if it remains a gift, it means that this act of giving is continuous, like a true loving relationship, like a good marriage or a real friendship or a true loving community. The bond that unites you to other people in love is not a fixed bond, but an exchange, a continuous flow of giving and receiving. That's relationship. And the minute you try to staunch the flow, to stop the flow, and possess, or control, or manipulate, or own in some way, then it begins to die. It withers on the bough. So, so poverty of spirit is this capacity actually to keep ourselves open to the giving, and to be in the flow of the relationship between giver and receiver. And when it really flows, you don't know who is giving and who is receiving, because the act of receiving is a kind of gift to the giver, because the giver wants to give, and if you receive, you are giving a gift to the giver. If you refuse to receive, you are blocking the flow and pushing the giver away, which is painful, unrequited love. Painful, disappointing and isolating. And if you try to possess what is given, then you also cut yourself off from the giver. So the giving and the receiving is a kind of a dance. It's actually an expression of the divine life itself, the Trinity, the dance of being, the giving, the receiving, and the transcendence of the giving and the receiving in this creative person that we call the Spirit. So that's poverty of spirit, not a negative thing then. And in the same way, emptiness, which corresponds to that, not exactly, because you can't translate these terms precisely from Buddhism to Christianity, or from French to English, or from one language of science to the language of theology. You can only make suggested links, or what's the word, where you see the, what? Approximations or something. And so with emptiness, again, it sounds negative, and many people who don't know Buddhism will reject Buddhism as a negative or nihilistic philosophy. But emptiness, as the Dalai Lama says, is not nothingness. Emptiness is the true nature of things, and the true nature of things, in the Buddhist understanding, is impermanence and interdependence. So nothing that exists, nothing that has being, is permanent, cannot be fixed in a particular form, and it is always in relationship to a network of relationships that ultimately expands into the cosmos. Nothing is isolated. So when you put that definition of the true nature of things, emptiness and interdependence, together, you have a pretty good understanding of what the Christian would call creation, or the creature. The creature, that what is created is constantly in the process of change. I went round the island this afternoon, and I've never seen it quite from that angle before. And it's amazing, you realise what a huge piece of rock we are sitting on, and how massive, monumentally massive the cliffs are. And I don't know what they are, but these solid rock cliffs are being shaped and smoothed away and eventually bored through by the bombardment of the waves, and caves being gouged out in the solid rock by the waves, or arches created, very beautiful arches created by the force of the tides. So everything is mortal, everything is changing its form, and at the same time everything in creation has this quality of being mortal. Mortal means its form will eventually disappear entirely, sooner or later. And interdependent means that nothing stands alone in this process of change. We are all subject to an infinite network of influences which are changing us. That might seem from one perspective to be quite a terrifying picture of the world as in the grip of mortality, and that's why death is a very important thing for us to face and understand. But from another point of view, which is what we are preparing to enter into in the Easter mysteries, this mortality of creation, this impermanence of creation, actually reveals the Creator, the giver of life. So it's actually in the mortal that we experience eternal life. So this is the fifth stage of contemplation. But after the detachment, after you've got the detachment going in your lifestyle, this isn't just an idea, this is how you're actually living, then you come to understand the changeable nature of visible created things, how they derive from the earth and return again to the earth. Riches vanish, glory leaves us. When death comes, all such things disappear. And again, truly all things are vanity. Life is but a shadow and a dream. And every person born of the earth troubles himself in vain, as the scripture says. By the time we have gained the whole world, we shall be in the grave where king and pauper are one. So this is one voice of the wisdom tradition. All things are vanity. We see that in Jesus' teaching himself. You know, the rich man who spent all his time building bigger barns to put more, to possess more things, and then he was called out of this life unexpectedly, and suddenly you see the vanity and the empty, there's the sort of the meaninglessness of all of that possessive behaviour. And this is a passage, a very beautiful passage actually, from chapter 11 of the prophet Isaiah, which he's quoting. And this is where he says that you, in the fifth stage of contemplation, you receive, or you get the spirit of counsel. So the spirit of wisdom, you could say. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. These are actually words used of the Messiah, so words applying to Jesus. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, power, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And this shall make him quick of understanding. See? The whole of nature joins in symphony. What about me, she said. And shall make him quick of understanding in the fear of the Lord. You remember, the fear of the Lord is not the fear of punishment, but it's the sense of awe and wonder which is the basis of our spiritual journey. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have a discussion later, please. I'd like you to know that Adriana is putting all these talks up on the web, and so the Bere Island cows will be heard all over the world. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes or the hearing of his ears. So our judgment, our way of understanding reality, understanding our own experience, will not be superficial. It will not just be at the level of the senses. There will be this deeper spiritual knowledge which creates true wisdom. but with righteousness shall he judge the poor. Righteousness, again, one of those words that seems a rather unattractive word, the self-righteous. We think of it in terms of self-righteousness. But righteous means just, fair. We want righteousness in the banking system. We want righteousness in the way we care for those who can't care for themselves, for the poor, for the handicapped, for those who are alone and don't have friends or family to look after them. This is righteousness. And so out of this spirit of counsel comes a true awareness of the nature of things, and out of that true awareness comes justice, fairness, decency, good order in society and in all our relationships. So, this fifth step then is recognizing the changeable nature of visible created things, and it therefore makes us aware of the presence and of the nature and the inevitability of death. Death, according to contemporary psychological research, is our deepest repression. Deeper than any sexual repression or fear is our repression of the fear of death. And yet death, of course, is the most universal and inevitable of all things, the most certain of all things. When this morning we saw that the fourth stage of contemplation was coming to an understanding of our Lord's incarnation. Well, the incarnation is the divine acceptance of human limitations, that the fullness of the Godhead dwells in the humanity of Jesus embodied. Something we can't quite get our minds around, which is why it has the capacity, like a great koan, to open our minds, to create wonder, if we really pay attention to it, if we really sit with it, if we really detach it from some of the institutional ways in which it's been presented to us, if we try to come to this as a new truth, a new revelation, which is what reliving Easter every year is supposed to be. We get another opportunity to see this as if it were for the first time. And so in the incarnation, God in Jesus takes on all human limitations, including, of course, the major limitation of death. And so, related to this fifth step of contemplation is our awareness of death, our mindfulness of death. All religions have a practice or a discipline or a skill of developing an awareness of death. Now you might say, well, you don't need to do that, there's enough death around. Why should we be mindful of it? We really don't want to be thinking about it until we have to. But actually the wisdom of the spiritual traditions is that actually this is the best way to deal with death, is to be prepared for it. And mindfulness of death, there are different practices and different traditions, some of them culturally rather offensive to us, spending the night. If you were a Buddhist monk in Thailand, your abbot might well tell you to go and spend the night in a graveyard, to overcome your fear of death in that way, or the fear of the dead. So there are different forms of practice of mindfulness of death. But they all agree that some kind of practice is necessary if we are to lift this repression so that the fear of death no longer becomes an obsession or a major repression. And therefore, when we are freed from the repression, all of that energy which is taken up in repression and denial is set free, and we find ourselves able to live and enjoy life much more. This is another paradox. One of the Desert Fathers says, one of the sayings is, an elder said, whoever keeps the idea of death before his eyes will always overcome his... What word would you put in there? Whoever keeps the image of death or the idea of death before his eyes will always overcome his fear. Attachments. Self. Fantasies. All true. What he says is faint-heartedness. Interesting. So if this mindfulness of death gives you courage. Faint-hearted means what? Fear and nervousness and the inability to commit yourself, the inability to let go. The opposite of why do we cling to things? Why do we try to possess things? Because these things seem to give us security. They seem to protect us from death, impermanence. And one more, fill in the missing gap. Perfect awareness of death is free from all illusion. You don't have to put yourself in the mind of the person who wrote it, just say what you think it means. Perfect awareness of death is free from all attachments, struggle, projections. If you were perfectly mindful of death, of impermanence, doesn't mean just your own physical death, but of the impermanence of everything in your life. Everything in your life, that's the frightening thing, that's the scary thing. But it is to be free of all anguish. You might say anxiety. How do we develop, or might we develop these, this mindfulness of death in a wise way? I think understanding the scriptures is one way. I think we're beginning to sense in the small groups, I hope, that when you open the scriptures especially in a small group like we're doing, an understanding, the spirit of knowledge, the spirit of wisdom, the spirit of counsel gets released. Remember, these are the mysteries hidden in the scriptures. So you expose them, you let them out, you open them, and that's one way. Another, I think, is to face our own unconscious denial of death. If we can do that, with the self-knowledge that comes to us. Another, I think, is the Eucharist. if we could really see the Eucharist properly, and not just as a obligation, not just as a church sacrament, as it were, and not just as a way of identifying yourself as a religious being, or not just a social obligation. But if we could really see the Eucharist for what it is, I think that is very much a mindfulness of death, and the making presence of the life of Christ. And meditation itself. If you don't want to read the scriptures and you don't want to celebrate the Eucharist, then meditation itself, I think, does it. Because every time you're saying the mantra, you are really entering into the impermanence of your own mind, of your thoughts. You're thinking about one thing 1 second, 2 seconds later you're thinking, moved on to some other thought, or dream, or anxiety, or plan, or memory. So letting go of that, I mean, the only thing that gives a sense of permanence to the constant flow of our minds is the fact that we are just bobbing along the surface of our minds all the time. But actually, when you step back from it a little bit, and you see just how it is all just fragments on the surface, how our thoughts are constantly changing, our moods are constantly changing, then that is mindfulness of death. Not thinking about death isn't quite the same as being mindful of death. So the mindfulness of death is the awareness of the impermanence of things, and at the same time an acceptance of the way things are, the true nature of things. And once we've got into that awareness, we see further. We see that in the true nature of things there is also the Spirit of God. Good. So we can take a little time before we meditate. If anyone would like to share anything or raise any questions, share any insights that you came to as you listened to the cows, or watched the weather change, or watch the grass grow. Anything that's struck you during your time here? What we often do on some retreats, actually, we could do it. We could do it here now, if you like. Is to have is for people to write haikus. Haikus is a form of Japanese poetry, which is technically quite a strict form. It's, I forget how many it is, 17 syllables in 3 lines, but you don't have to be too strict about that. But the idea of the haiku poem is that you take a snapshot in a few very simple words of something that struck you, some moment of insight or awareness. It doesn't have to be a clever thought. I don't mean that. And these haikus are not meant to be intellectual or conceptual. It's merely just like taking a picture of a moment that strikes you with significance or beauty, or moves you in some way, catches your attention in some significant way. So if you get it's a bit like carrying a camera. I find carrying a camera helps me to pay attention and to get out of my head or what I've been thinking about. And then after a certain while, you don't need the camera anymore. You can just enjoy what's there. But until you've learnt to focus, and be in the present moment, the danger is that you're still in your head and you're not really present to what's around you. So the haiku is a bit like that. You can use these little poems, or the writing of these poems, as a way of taking a picture in words, and then it can help you be more present and more mindful. So, please.
I was interested in what you were saying this morning about this knowledge that is within us, and that we can be midwives to each other in bringing the knowledge out. And it's just intriguing for me. This is a different sort of retreat where we are not in silence, and we're meeting and having some conversation, and it's just sort of carrying that sense of wondering what the conversation's about, or just noticing the conversation, I think. And it's a little bit like what you're saying, noticing a moment. And it's a lovely image of midwives for each other, bringing knowledge out, something that's there. And just in these occasional, seemingly random or incidental connections, noticing something about them.
Thank you, yes. Yes, I once started a retreat in the States, I think, and I was saying, this was a monastery, and said we were going to be in silence, and this man came up to me and said, you know, are we not going to have any talking? So I said, no. And he said, well, I'm blind, I live alone at home. When I come on a retreat like this, I meet people, and some of them I know, friends, and the monks, he said, you know, can't we have talking at meals? I said, no. And, well, I hope I wasn't quite like that, but I said, no, it's a silent retreat. And actually, he said afterwards, it did make me feel a bit cruel, but then everybody else, he knew it was a silent retreat, whatever you mean by that. But he said afterwards that he said it was amazing. He said, you know, people were kind to me, and obviously they said, you know, they weren't obsessively non-verbal. If they needed to say something, they would. But the spirit of silence struck him. He said, for the first time, I realised that, you know, I can really be in a satisfying way with people in silence, even blind as I am, which was a wonderful breakthrough for him. I think he said he was grateful for it. He said he wouldn't come again, but he liked it. And so I think you're right. I think there's a time to be silent, and there's a time to speak. And if we are never silent, then our words and conversation become superficial and a bit boring. You feel you're not really connecting at a deep level. So you need the silence to create that dimension for depth. But if you are obsessively silent, you think that that's the way to perfection, you risk becoming isolated. And so the two, hopefully we learn the balance. Even on a retreat like this, we know when to be silent and when to speak. A lot more in a retreat like this, a lot more depends upon your own judgment. And but I think that's the spirit works in both dimensions, doesn't it?
I love your notion of the haiku.
Mm.
Never quite thought of it as a camera.
Mm.
So can I share what I just
Oh,
wrote?
good, yes. Just now you wrote it.
I was startled a number of times in the last few days. Have people seen the little butterflies?
Yes.
With the orange corners in the wings. Just in the very corner of their wings, a little triangle of orange. So I just wrote this now after you suggested it.
Thank you.
Surprised by my shadow, the startled butterfly took flight with its white and orange wings.
That's a haiku. Yeah.
It captures it's better than a camera.
Mm.
Because the discipline makes you, throw out words that are redundant and just think about what you really want to say.
Mm. Yes. And there is there's a witness there. The writing of the poem is a witness to the event. So there's a sense of a personal, but non-judgmental, but personal. Okay. You write two more before the end of this? We once were on a retreat in Australia, remember, and I mentioned this, and one of the people on the retreat was a highly disciplined sort of intellect, he was a lawyer, and he had never heard of this haiku thing before, but he got hold of it, and most people wrote haikus in their own form, but he decided to do it to the strict Japanese discipline of 17 syllables, and he became a veritable machine. They were pouring out of him. And we put them up. Actually, we can do that if you like. If you bring your haikus, they should be unsigned, and that you can just where can we put them? We'll find a place. So if you bring them and put them maybe on the table at the back, and people can enjoy them.
Do you think the relation of impermanence and inspiration, which is seems clear that it's a lot of practice, whether it's the same meaning like the passage of the Gospel we were reading, where Jesus was saying, I'm going, but the Spirit will come. There's a sense that we are inspired by. The inspiration comes when we recognise impermanence, maybe even most strongly what we're the impermanence of even what we're most attached to. I don't know, it's a question.
What's the question?
I write poetry, and it's true that the most inspired moments come from a kind of, that's why poetry can be a bit melancholic at times, because you realise that things are passing, changing all the time. And that kind of I'm just trying to see what's the giving when Jesus says give His Spirit to us. I mean, that seems to come out of a sense of the sorrow of Him leaving. That somehow that enables the Spirit to come. So any sense of impermanence is an openness to inspiration. Now, whether inspiration and the giving of the Spirit is the same thing, in some sense it is. So I don't know why they're related, but I think that's my question.
We'll replay your question to you, and that you will see that you have answered it yourself. No, I think there is a bittersweet aspect to it. And if it was all sweet, it would be cloying and too sweet. And if it was all bitterness, it would be unbearable. I think it's interesting when if just the mirror image of that, I think, is when you're meditating, and if you are really doing the work, and if you're in a good space, you're saying the mantra with real attention. And if you are really in the work, and your own distractions are more or less left aside to do their own thing, then and somebody drops something in the room or bangs the door or sneezes, it doesn't bother you. And your first thought is not, they've spoiled my meditation with this outside distraction. Because you're actually free of your own distractions, and therefore outside external influences don't hit you as distractions. However, if you are meditating and you are really battling with or you're rather lost, 80% of your self is caught up in thoughts, and plans and memories and dreams, and when somebody does sneeze or fall off the chair or something, that really does annoy you. You think how inconsiderate of them. So that's the mirror image of of this experience of loss, or the insight into impermanence. Where there is attachment still, then the awareness of impermanence is going to be painful and sorrowful. But when that has been accepted and the insight is really a free insight, and you just accept it as it is, then the result of the insight is joy, is joyfulness, which is one of the tests I think that the Buddhists have for, was your insight into emptiness really deep and true? If it was, then you will have felt joyful as a result of it. So it's before and after, in a way, before and after the attachment. And it's a bit, something of that may be reflected in the resurrection appearances, when Jesus himself was sorrowful at the his own impending death and separation from the world and from the people he loved, and we don't see that sorrow at all after the resurrection. Jesus is in another space. Still human, so that means we can be human and dwell in this space of impermanence without feeling sad. Not just because Jesus was God that this is possible, it's because he was human. We can relate to it and be taught by it. And the disciples were also sad, and their way of dealing with the sadness was to go to sleep in the Garden of Gethsemane, because they couldn't bear facing the reality of it. And then after the resurrection, when they had the experience of his presence, when they see him, they take some time to adjust to what they're experiencing and to accept it. And when they recognize him, he disappears from their sight. And that seems like another separation, like the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And yet, it's not the same kind of separation, because the separation before the death, his death, was full of anguish and passion and fear and darkness and agony. The separation afterwards is, that's the way it is. And they don't seem to be sad when he disappears from their sight. You'd think they'd say, oh, lost him again. But they don't say that. They run off with a new sense of purpose in life. And they know what their life is about, what their job is. So it's still separation in a way, but it's no longer felt as disabling or as sad or melancholic. Vince?
Well, maybe that's because they grieved, you know, and had to work through that. But do you think, I mean, sometimes I think that it's a bit black and white, you know, attachment, non-attachment, permanence, impermanence, because, you know, there is I mean, impermanence, everything is impermanent, but there's also evolution, there's continuity, there's all sorts of permanences that go on that are mysterious, permanences between the way we've evolved as humans, family permanences in the cells, in the genes. You know, I'm the permanence of the gospel, the truth, the universal truth. So I think for me, I struggle with it a bit sometimes, feeling that it's either one thing or the other. And in fact, it's all of those. For me, it's all of those. And even this morning's talk of, you know, detachment or attachment, it's a mixture of things, usually, that make up the picture. So sometimes I struggle with it a bit, thinking it's either one or the other, or it's a little bit black and white, and I think it's usually all of those things in some form or another. I don't know what you think of that.
No, I agree. It's not. They are both aspects. It depends. What kind of zoom lens you're using to look at it. And if you focus on a very small detail or the instant, then you do see that things are passing away very rapidly, ticking of the clock. But if you pull back the zoom and you have a broader view, then you see geological time, you know, like the cliffs we're sitting on now. And your reaction to that is very different, of course, from the feeling of losing something here and now that you love. So yes, I agree. And life is about changing your focus, daily life, and being grounded, having your feet on the ground, not in some realm of abstraction. It's Blake's idea, isn't it, of seeing eternity in the moment, whatever it is, and infinity in a grain of sand. And respect for people, love for people, does mean that you, I mean, I think the Queen's of England, if you don't mind me mentioning the Queen here, probably her epitaph will be the most, the thing when, who was it? Oh, it was after 9/11. She came out with a statement that was rippled through the world. I'm not quite sure where it came from, whether it was her own or somebody else's. She said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." And if I think what I would agree with you, or the way I would sense what you're saying, is that we have to accept attachment as some degree anyway, an inevitable part of the process of learning to love. We wouldn't be able to love without some, although that attachment is going to cause us pain. But we wouldn't be able to do it without it. So, but the wisdom would be not to become too attached and too controlling and too possessive.
It seems in that Lazarus story, Jesus has got both lenses operating, like he weeps for Lazarus dying.
Mm.
Although a few moments later he's going to transcend death.
Mm.
So he can hold both.
Mm.
And they seem important to the story to me that he weeps.
Mm. Yes. Very much, yes.
I think that the invitation or the evolution of spiritual development, if we can speak of that, is the mastery of the impermanence and of the attachments. You know, it's not the elimination of them, you know, but it's to handle them properly as they come and go, and to hold them and withhold them, and to let them go when they go. And in that sense, I also agree with this non-duality contribution. It's not black or white, but there's something about assertiveness as we live through each passing moment, you know, and
yes. I had some years ago a Buddhist monk friend who was we shared a lot, but he was always quite, he was a bit contemptuous in a way of the Christian idea of love. Whenever I spoke, when we had discussions and I would speak about love, he said, love, you know, so, just an early stage of attachment, you know. And his particular form of Buddhism was known, you know, was quite austere and rigorous about all kinds of emotions and attachments of this kind. And it always seemed to me, well, anyway, that was what he was like. But then I didn't hear from him for a while, and he changed his location and he was doing something different. And after some time I heard from him, and he said he was working with someone, a woman, setting up something or other. And then a little bit later, he'd fallen in love. And perhaps, you know, that much more rigorous attitude to human emotions, you know, was maybe that was his way of dealing with something for a time. But it was too black and white, and he was learning something else from the other side. And to fall in love is very wonderful, but it will bring its own challenges and problems and difficulties as well, clearly. So, as I think you both said, if we take the broadest view of these issues, you see that they are all contained in, and maybe in the most sort of the deepest theology. It says in the Acts, in the book of Revelation, it has this strange reference to the sacrifice of the Lamb that has been taking place for all from the beginning, from eternity. So the death of Jesus is a symbol or a reflection or a manifestation of something at the deepest level of reality. some sacrifice, what we might give the word sacrifice to, or some letting go, or some transcendence, or some impermanence even in some way, that is contained in God at a level that we cannot understand. Good. Well, on that clear note, let's prepare for meditation. Want to stand and have a little stretch?